A small act of kindness. As Jasmine strolled through the familiar streets of her town, the low hum of daily life surrounded her. There was the sound of distant cars, the occasional bark of a dog, and the voices of her neighbors greeting one another. Everything felt unchanged, yet there was something in the air today that felt a little different. A quiet anticipation, as if something was on the verge of happening. Jasmine couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she'd learned over the years to trust her gut. She turned the corner onto Main Street, where the food bank was located. The small brick building had seen better days. Peeling paint on the front door, cracked windows. But it stood as a beacon of hope for many in the town. The people who ran it, including Mrs. Roberts, were known for their kindness. Mrs. Roberts was a woman who had spent her entire life helping those in need, and her dedication had rubbed off on Jasmine. In many ways, the food bank was a reminder of the orphanage Jasmine had grown up in, where people, even strangers, had lent a hand when she needed it most. Jasmine stepped through the door of the food bank, greeted by the usual smells of old paper, fresh produce, and a hint of freshly baked bread. The space was bustling with activity. Volunteers, mostly retirees and young students, were sorting through donations, packing boxes for families who had fallen on hard times. Mrs. Roberts was at the back, organizing a new delivery of canned goods, her eyes lighting up when she saw Jasmine. "There you are, Jasmine," Mrs. Roberts said warmly, her voice cracking slightly with age. "Good to see you, dear. We could use some help in the kitchen, if you've got a minute." Jasmine smiled, knowing exactly what Mrs. Roberts meant. The food bank was always in need of volunteers, especially during the busy months when the donations piled up. But it wasn't just about the work. It was about creating a space where the community came together, where people felt seen, even in their struggle. "Sure, I've got time," Jasmine replied, rolling up her sleeves as she moved to the kitchen. As she washed the dishes and prepared some of the food for the community dinner later that evening, Jasmine couldn't help but reflect on how much her life had changed. She had grown up in that orphanage, moved from foster home to foster home, always feeling like a puzzle piece that never quite fit. Yet through all of it, the lessons she had learned, the importance of kindness, of giving, of never losing hope, had stayed with her. She wanted to offer that same love and security to others, even if it was just one person at a time. After a few hours of volunteering, Jasmine decided to take a break. She needed to step outside and get some fresh air. She grabbed her bag and slipped out the door, heading toward the nearby grocery store to pick up a few things before heading home. The sun was still high in the sky, and the warmth of the day seemed to cling to her skin, making everything feel more vivid and alive. When Jasmine entered the store, it was relatively quiet for a Saturday afternoon. The air-conditioned coolness inside felt like a relief from the warmth outside. As she moved through the aisles, filling her basket with groceries, her attention was drawn to an elderly man standing near the produce section. His frail figure was hunched over slightly, and he was tapping his white cane against the floor, the sound echoing softly in the otherwise quiet store. Jasmine paused for a moment, noticing that the man appeared to be having difficulty navigating the aisles. His hand hovered over a pile of apples, unsure of which one to pick. His gaze was distant, the cloudy eyes behind his thick glasses, unable to discern the colors or shapes around him. He was struggling, and the small inconvenience seemed to grow into something more significant with every passing second. Without thinking, Jasmine approached him. "Excuse me, sir," she said gently. "Can I help you with something?" The old man looked up, startled by her voice. His eyes searched for her through the thick lenses of his glasses before his face softened, and he offered a faint smile. "Oh my, thank you. I'm just trying to pick out some apples," he said, his voice weak but filled with gratitude. "It's harder to do than it used to be." Jasmine smiled, her heart warming at his vulnerability. She glanced at the apples on the shelf and carefully selected a few, placing them in his basket. "How about these?" she asked. "They look nice and fresh." He nodded, his shaky hands reaching for the apples. "You have a good eye, young lady," he said, his voice softening with appreciation. "I used to be able to pick out the best ones, but now it's a bit more difficult." "Don't worry, I've got you," Jasmine reassured him, giving him a friendly smile. She moved down the aisle with him, picking out a few more items from the shelves, carefully reading the labels for him. He seemed to relax in her company, his earlier anxiety fading with every small gesture of kindness. As they continued through the aisles, the elderly man introduced himself as Mr. Langston. He explained that he had lost his sight years ago, a slow and painful process that had left him isolated in ways he hadn't anticipated. His wife had passed away a few years before, and since then, he had struggled with living on his own. Despite the difficulties, he had maintained a quiet sense of pride and independence. "You're very kind," Mr. Langston said as they reached the checkout counter. "Not many people would stop to help an old man like me." Jasmine felt her chest tighten with empathy. "It's no trouble at all, Mr. Langston. We all need a little help sometimes, right?" He smiled at her, a deep sense of gratitude in his eyes. "You're a rare soul, my dear. I'm not sure how to repay you for your kindness." Jasmine waved her hand dismissively. "There's no need for repayment. I'm just glad to help." As they parted ways outside the store, Mr. Langston placed a hand on her shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You've got a heart full of goodness, Jasmine. Keep it that way." Jasmine watched him walk slowly down the street, his cane tapping rhythmically against the sidewalk. She felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet sense of fulfillment that couldn't be explained. It was the simple act of helping someone, a moment of connection in an otherwise ordinary day. Yet, for some reason, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random encounter. Something about it felt significant, like a small ripple that would slowly grow into something bigger. As she turned to head home, Jasmine's thoughts lingered on Mr. Langston. There was something about him, his kindness, his humility, that resonated deeply within her. She couldn't help but wonder if their meeting was the start of something more. The idea lingered in her mind, refusing to be shaken, and she felt an overwhelming sense that today had marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life. The unexpected call. The day after helping Mr. Langston in the grocery store felt like any other. Jasmine went about her daily routine, still carrying the warmth of their brief encounter in her heart. She spent the morning volunteering at the food bank, assisting Mrs. Roberts and the other volunteers in preparing meals for families in need. The small acts of kindness she offered to those around her, sorting donations, delivering food, offering a smile, felt purposeful, but nothing seemed to shake the lingering thought of Mr. Langston. She couldn't help but wonder what had been so significant about their meeting. It was a small, seemingly inconsequential moment, but there was something about the man and the way he had expressed his gratitude that struck her deeply. As the afternoon wore on, Jasmine returned home to her modest apartment, a one-bedroom unit above a small bookstore in the heart of town. She loved the quiet space with its sun-dappled windows and the shelves stacked with books she'd collected over the years. It was a place of comfort, but also a place where she often found herself alone with her thoughts. Jasmine sat on the couch, sipping a cup of chamomile tea, when her phone rang. It was an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello, Jasmine." The voice on the other end was warm, yet carried a sense of authority. Jasmine immediately recognized it. "Mr. Langston?" she asked, her pulse quickening. She hadn't expected to hear from him so soon. "Yes, it's me," Mr. Langston replied. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Jasmine said quickly. "What's going on?" "I've been thinking about you, and I've decided to take you up on your offer from yesterday," Mr. Langston said. "You were such a big help to me, and I couldn't help but feel a connection. I've been running a small foundation for the last few years, mostly for the elderly in our community, but also for anyone in need. It's been a challenge to manage, and I think it's time for it to grow beyond just a personal project." Jasmine sat up straighter, curiosity piqued. "That sounds amazing, Mr. Langston, but how can I help?" I don't know much about running a foundation or anything like that. Mr. Langston's voice softened, a hint of a smile in his tone. I wasn't expecting you to be an expert. What I'm hoping for is someone who understands the importance of kindness, who knows the value of human connection. You've demonstrated that already with your help yesterday. I think you have the heart and the drive to help make this foundation something truly impactful. Jasmine's heart began to race. Are you asking me to join you in running the foundation? She asked, almost unable to believe it. Exactly, Mr. Langston replied. I want to offer you a leadership role. I know it might sound sudden, but I feel that you have the right qualities to help grow the foundation into something bigger. More people need what we offer, Jasmine. And with your energy and passion, I know we can make a real difference. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. The suddenness of the offer took her by surprise. She had never imagined that such a simple act of kindness would lead her down this path. She had always dreamed of making a difference, of helping others in a more meaningful way. But she never anticipated that her chance would come so unexpectedly. I don't know what to say, Jasmine stammered, her mind racing. This is a lot to take in. Are you sure you want me? I mean, I'm just starting out in life. I don't have experience in this kind of thing. Mr. Langston's voice softened again, almost as if he were speaking to a granddaughter. Jasmine, sometimes the best leaders are the ones who care the most. Experience can be learned, but compassion cannot be faked. And I see that compassion in you. Trust me, you're more than capable. I'm not asking you to take on this responsibility alone. There's a team of volunteers, and we can work together. But I believe you could be the heart of this foundation. You could lead it to grow and touch more lives than you ever thought possible. Jasmine sat quietly, feeling a mixture of awe and fear. She had always wondered what her purpose was, what she was truly meant to do in the world. She had known she wanted to help others, but this felt like a calling she hadn't expected. It was one thing to give back in small ways, through volunteering at the food bank or helping neighbors. But to take on a leadership role, to steer a foundation that could truly change lives, was an entirely different challenge. The weight of that responsibility felt both thrilling and daunting. Mr. Langston, Jasmine said after a long pause, her voice steady despite the swirling emotions inside her. I'm honored by your offer, and I'd love to help. I'll do whatever I can to make this foundation grow. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Mr. Langston spoke again, his tone filled with warmth. I knew you'd say yes. You have a good heart, Jasmine, and I believe this is only the beginning of something special. Let's meet tomorrow. I'll tell you everything you need to know, and we can get started. Jasmine smiled, a sense of purpose filling her chest. I'll be there. Thank you, Mr. Langston. As she hung up the phone, Jasmine sank back into her couch, her hands trembling slightly. A sense of disbelief washed over her. She had just accepted a role that could change the trajectory of her life, a role she wasn't sure she was fully ready for. But the excitement, the possibility of truly making a difference, overpowered her doubts. The next few hours were a blur as Jasmine tried to absorb what had just happened. Her mind kept replaying the conversation with Mr. Langston. His confidence in her, his belief that she was the right person to lead this foundation. She knew she had always been passionate about helping others. But this was a whole new level. As the evening approached, Jasmine realized she would have to prepare for the next day. She had no idea what she was walking into, but she was determined to give it her all. After all, this was a chance to build something that could last, something that could help those who needed it most. That night, as she lay in bed, Jasmine thought about her life. Growing up in the orphanage, struggling to find her place in a world that often felt indifferent. But now she could see a path opening up before her, one where she could make an impact, not just for herself, but for others too. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." Stepping into the unknown. The following morning, Jasmine woke up earlier than usual. The excitement from the previous night still buzzed in her veins, making it difficult to sleep, but she had learned to embrace that energy. It was a sign that something big was happening. She had just agreed to take on a role that could change her life forever. And though she was anxious, she knew she couldn't let this opportunity slip by. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden glow through her window as she pulled on her favorite pair of jeans and a simple blouse. She didn't want to overthink her appearance. This wasn't a job interview, but rather the start of something new. Something bigger than anything she had ever anticipated. Jasmine took a deep breath and left her apartment, the cool morning air filling her lungs. She walked briskly through the quiet streets, the town still asleep, her thoughts swirling around her upcoming meeting with Mr. Langston. She hadn't expected anything like this when she helped him in the grocery store yesterday. A simple, kind gesture had led to an invitation that felt like a calling. The foundation Mr. Langston had started wasn't a large one, yet it was small with a handful of volunteers, but the dream was far bigger. He had been providing support for the elderly and those in need within their community, offering food, financial assistance, and social programs. Over the years, it had grown into something much more than just a charity. It had become a lifeline for many people, and now Mr. Langston wanted to see it grow into something that could change lives on a larger scale. Jasmine arrived at his modest house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, a small bungalow with a front porch that looked out over a field of tall grass, swaying gently in the morning breeze. Mr. Langston greeted her at the door, his face lighting up when he saw her. Despite his age, there was a sharpness in his eyes, an energy that Jasmine found both inspiring and comforting. "Good morning, Jasmine. I'm so glad you could make it," he said, stepping aside to let her in. "Please, come in, come in. We've got a lot to talk about." Jasmine stepped inside, feeling the warmth of the small house envelop her. The walls were lined with shelves filled with books, pictures of family and friends, and awards from years of community service. She could tell that Mr. Langston was a man who had given his life to others, and there was something incredibly humbling about being in his presence. "Can I get you something to drink? Tea, coffee, or just some water?" he offered, leading her to the cozy kitchen. "Tea sounds perfect," Jasmine replied, settling into one of the chairs at the small dining table. "So, what's next?" "Well," Mr. Langston began as he carefully poured water into the kettle, "I've been thinking a lot about what we can do to make this foundation more sustainable and impactful. The need in this town, and beyond, is great, but we're just a small team right now, and I believe we need a stronger presence, more resources, more volunteers, more funding." Jasmine nodded, her mind already buzzing with possibilities. She had no experience with fundraising or running an organization of this size, but she had always been a fast learner. And one thing was for sure, she had the passion to drive it forward. "I'm all ears," she said, eager to hear Mr. Langston's vision. "We've got a lot of ideas," he said, sitting across from her, his eyes glimmering with determination. "We've been providing food, but I want us to offer more. What if we started a mentorship program for young people? You know, something that pairs them with older generations. The elderly have so much wisdom to offer, and young people need guidance. It could bridge the gap, help foster stronger community ties." Jasmine's eyes lit up at the idea. It was brilliant. The community had been fractured for too long, with so many people feeling isolated. This could be the beginning of something that truly brought them together, making everyone feel seen and appreciated. "That sounds incredible," she said, a sense of purpose rising within her. "I think that's exactly what this town needs." Mr. Langston smiled, clearly pleased with her response. "I'm glad you think so. And that's just one part of it. The next step is to start organizing outreach events, raise awareness about what we do, and bring in more people who are willing to donate their time or resources." Jasmine could feel the weight of the task ahead. It wasn't going to be easy. Running a foundation, especially one that was just starting to grow, would come with its challenges. But she wasn't afraid of hard work. If anything, It was the very thing that made her feel alive. The idea of working towards something bigger than herself, something that could make a real impact. "Where do we start?" she asked, her voice steady and determined. Mr. Langston's face softened, and he placed his hand over his heart. "I'm glad you're with me on this, Jasmine. The first thing we need to do is spread the word. I've got a few key contacts that can help us get the ball rolling. But I think you'll be the perfect person to lead the outreach efforts. You've got the passion, the heart, and the energy to inspire others." Jasmine was taken aback. "Lead the outreach efforts, but I don't know where to start." Mr. Langston chuckled, the sound deep and rich. "You'll learn, and I'll be here to guide you. But you've already got the most important part. You care about this community, and you care about people. The rest will come." Jasmine took a deep breath, feeling both overwhelmed and excited by the responsibility that was being placed on her shoulders. She knew there would be bumps along the way, challenges she hadn't even considered yet. But in that moment, she made a silent promise to herself. She would give everything she had to make this foundation succeed. For Mr. Langston, for the community, and for herself. As the day wore on, they discussed more details, plans for a fundraiser, potential partnerships with local businesses, and strategies for reaching out to more volunteers. Jasmine scribbled down notes, her mind whirling with new ideas. She felt more alive than she had in a long time. But as the afternoon turned to evening, there was something else that lingered in the back of her mind. The feeling that this foundation wasn't just about helping others. It was about discovering who she was meant to be. It was about finding her place in the world, one act of kindness at a time. When the meeting ended, Jasmine stepped outside into the cool evening air. The town was quieter now, the streets empty as most people had retreated into their homes. But for the first time in a long time, Jasmine didn't feel alone. She felt connected to something much bigger than herself. A community, a cause, and a future she was determined to build. The next day, Jasmine started putting together a plan for the foundation. She would begin by reaching out to people she knew, neighbors, friends, former volunteers, and ask them to spread the word. It was a small start, but it was a start nonetheless, and with every small step, Jasmine felt her purpose becoming clearer. As she sat down at her desk later that evening, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Mr. Langston. "Remember, Jasmine, great things take time, but they start with people who believe in them. I believe in you." Jasmine smiled and typed a quick reply. "Thank you, Mr. Langston. Let's make this happen." Challenges and triumphs. The days that followed were filled with action, uncertainty, and an overwhelming sense of purpose. Jasmine had thrown herself into her new role with all the determination she could muster. She was in constant contact with Mr. Langston, who guided her every step of the way. Each new task presented a fresh challenge, but she welcomed the opportunity to learn, grow, and contribute to the Foundation's mission. What had started as a small idea in Mr. Langston's living room was beginning to take shape, slowly but surely. Jasmine began with outreach, starting small by contacting people in the community who had shown interest in helping others. She tapped into her network of friends, neighbors, and local volunteers, explaining her vision for the foundation and how they could be part of something greater. She used social media to create posts about the foundation's mission, sharing the vision of bridging generational gaps and offering assistance to those in need. Slowly but steadily, the word started to spread. But as much as Jasmine was energized by the support, she also began to feel the weight of her new responsibilities. With each new volunteer she recruited, with each meeting she set up, the pressure of leading this effort began to take hold. She had always been the person who helped from the sidelines, offering her assistance without stepping into the spotlight. Now, she was at the center of everything, responsible for a foundation that could potentially affect hundreds of lives. Her confidence wavered at times, especially when she faced challenges that tested her abilities. One particular hurdle came when Jasmine arranged her first major event for the foundation, a community luncheon for the elderly, offering them a chance to socialize and access free meals. She had envisioned it as a simple yet impactful gathering, a way to bring the older generation together while showcasing the work the foundation was doing. She spent weeks planning every detail: the venue, the catering, the volunteers, and the activities. She even managed to secure a few local businesses to donate food and supplies. But when the day of the event arrived, things didn't go according to plan. The venue was packed with more people than expected, and there was a mix-up with the food delivery, leaving the volunteers scrambling to make up for the shortage. The sound system malfunctioned during the speeches, and there was chaos as the volunteers tried to get everything back on track. Jasmine could feel her nerves fraying as the minutes ticked by. She had hoped that this event would be a triumph, something that would solidify the foundation's place in the community, but instead, it felt like everything was falling apart. Mr. Langston, however, was there, quietly observing from the sidelines. He had been through countless challenges like this in his lifetime, and he saw something in Jasmine that most people would overlook. He could see her starting to doubt herself, the frustration building up as she tried to fix the situation. When she finally caught his eye, he gave her a reassuring smile. "You're doing fine, Jasmine," he said calmly. "This is part of the process. You can't always control everything, but you can control how you respond." Jasmine took a deep breath, nodding. He was right. She couldn't let the setbacks define her. She had come this far, and no mistake, no matter how big or small, was going to stop her from seeing this through. She turned to the volunteers and began to organize them, delegating tasks and finding solutions on the fly. Slowly, the chaos began to subside, and the event started to feel like the success it was meant to be. The elderly attendees were enjoying themselves, chatting and laughing, and the volunteers were working together like a well-oiled machine. By the end of the day, despite the hiccups, the luncheon was a success. As the event wound down, Jasmine stood outside the venue, watching the sunset as the volunteers packed up. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but there was also a sense of pride swelling in her chest. She had faced a challenge head-on, and with the help of those around her, had turned it into a success. The foundation was still small, but Jasmine could feel it growing in her heart, as well as in the community. That night, Jasmine returned to her apartment, still riding the high of the day's success. She had learned an important lesson. There would always be obstacles, but they didn't have to derail her efforts. What mattered was staying focused on the bigger picture and knowing when to ask for help. As she was about to sit down to a quiet dinner, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Mr. Langston. "Great job today, Jasmine. You've got what it takes. One event doesn't define the foundation's success, but the way you handled it today shows you're ready for even bigger things. Keep pushing forward. We're just getting started." Jasmine smiled, her exhaustion easing slightly. It felt good to know she had Mr. Langston's support. He had always believed in her, even when she had doubts about herself. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Jasmine and the team worked tirelessly to expand the foundation's programs, reaching out to more people and forging new partnerships with local businesses. She began to see the impact of her work more clearly. People who had been struggling to make ends meet now had access to food, support, and companionship. The mentorship program took off, pairing young people with older community members who shared their wisdom and guidance. It was slow at first, but soon, the relationships began to flourish, bridging gaps between generations in a way Jasmine had never imagined. But it wasn't just the community that was growing. Jasmine was growing too. She had started the foundation with nothing but a passion to help others, but now she was beginning to see her own potential. She was becoming the leader Mr. Langston had always known she could be. She made mistakes along the way, plenty of them, but she learned from each one. She started to feel more confident in her decision-making, trusting her instincts and the team that surrounded her. One evening, as Jasmine was reviewing some paperwork for an upcoming event, she received a call that would change everything. It was a local news station. "Is this Jasmine Williams, the head of the Langston Foundation?" the reporter asked. "We've been following your organization's progress, and we'd love to feature your work on our segment next week. You've made such an impact in the community, and we think it's time people heard about it." Jasmine was speechless. She hadn't expected this kind of recognition, especially not so soon. The foundation was still small in comparison to other organizations, and they had only just begun to make waves. But this call was proof that they were on the right track. "I'd be honored," Jasmine finally managed to say, her voice trembling slightly. As she hung up the phone, Jasmine leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just about one person anymore. It was about a movement that was slowly but surely changing lives. And in that moment, Jasmine realized something else. She wasn't just helping the community was helping her too. She was no longer the shy, uncertain girl who had once walked alone. She had found her place, her purpose, and she was ready to take the next step. Rising Above, the news segment on Jasmine and the Langston Foundation aired the following week. When Jasmine first saw the broadcast, she could barely recognize the woman on the screen. The reporter had captured the passion in her eyes, the confidence in her voice, and the pride in her actions. Jasmine had spent the last few months battling her doubts and fears, but that moment, watching herself on television, felt like a defining turning point. It was no longer just about one woman helping out in a small town. It was about a growing movement that could inspire people across the country. The day after the segment aired, the phone began ringing incessantly. Local business owners, schools, and community leaders wanted to know how they could contribute to the foundation. People who had seen the segment reached out with donations, some financial, others in the form of goods, services, and volunteer hours. It seemed as though the entire town, and even people from neighboring areas, had taken notice of the work they were doing. Jasmine felt a surge of energy coursing through her. She had always dreamed of making a real difference, but she had never imagined the response would be this overwhelming. For the first time in her life, she was starting to feel like she was on the verge of something monumental. But with the success came an undeniable pressure. The growth of the foundation was exciting, but it also meant more responsibilities, more events to plan, more people to coordinate, more money to manage. As the foundation began to expand beyond the small community it had started in, Jasmine found herself stretched thinner and thinner. She was doing everything: answering emails, attending meetings, speaking with donors, organizing fundraisers, and still managing her personal life, which had started to take a backseat. The excitement of progress was paired with an ever-growing fear that she might lose control. Her balance was slipping, and for the first time, she felt a deep sense of loneliness creeping in. Mr. Langston, sensing her growing stress, called her into his office one afternoon. "Jasmine," he began gently, his voice filled with concern. "I've been watching you, and I know how hard you're working, but I want you to understand something. You can't do everything alone." Jasmine hesitated, a tightness in her chest. She hadn't realized how much she had been trying to do on her own until Mr. Langston pointed it out. She had always been the type to take on the burden herself, never asking for help. But this was different. This was bigger than anything she had ever done before. "I know," she admitted quietly. "I'm just trying to keep up with everything. I want this to succeed so badly." Mr. Langston smiled warmly, his eyes twinkling with understanding. "You want it to succeed because you care, Jasmine. That's why you've gotten this far. But you have a team now. Use them. Delegate. Let them help you. You're not alone in this." Those words, simple as they were, hit Jasmine like a wave. She had always prided herself on her independence, but what she was building was a team effort. She couldn't do it all herself, and trying to would only jeopardize everything she had worked so hard for. Over the next few days, Jasmine began to let go of some of the control. She started assigning tasks, trusting her volunteers, and leaning on others for support. One of the first things she did was bring in a new operations manager, someone who could handle the logistical side of things, while Jasmine focused on the bigger picture. She also recruited a fundraising coordinator to help with organizing events and seeking out new donors. Slowly, Jasmine's life started to feel more balanced. She wasn't carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders anymore. With the foundation's growth, however, came new challenges. The more people they helped, the more problems they encountered. There were families who needed housing assistance, people who had lost their jobs and couldn't afford rent, and elderly individuals who didn't have anyone to care for them. Every day, there seemed to be a new crisis, and each one seemed urgent. One evening, after another long day of meetings and problem-solving, Jasmine found herself walking through the quiet streets of the town. She needed space to think, to process everything that was happening. Her mind was buzzing with the weight of it all. Was she doing enough? Were they making a real difference? As she walked past the old community center, a small voice called out to her, "Miss Jasmine, Miss Jasmine." Jasmine turned to see a young girl, about 10 years old, running toward her. The girl was carrying a stack of books in her hands, her face bright with excitement. It was Naomi, a girl who had volunteered with the foundation after hearing about their mentorship program. Jasmine had seen her a few times at events, always eager to help out. "Hi, Miss Jasmine. I've been reading these books for the mentorship program, and I think I can help teach some of the older kids how to read better," Naomi said, her eyes wide with hope. Jasmine smiled, her heart swelling. "Naomi, that's wonderful. You're already making such a difference. I'm proud of you." The girl beamed, and for a moment, Jasmine forgot about the mounting pressure, the endless tasks, and the sleepless nights. Naomi's enthusiasm reminded her why she had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't about the long hours or the complications. It was about people. It was about creating opportunities for others, just as Naomi had found her own purpose through the foundation. That night, as Jasmine sat at her kitchen table, reviewing notes for an upcoming board meeting, she reflected on the events of the day. She thought about Naomi and how much she had grown through her involvement with the foundation. It was moments like these that reminded Jasmine why she was doing all of this. It wasn't just about logistics or fundraising or managing a growing team. It was about making a difference, one person at a time. A few days later, Jasmine received another unexpected surprise. A large envelope arrived in the mail, addressed to her personally. Inside, she found a letter from a prominent donor in a nearby city, someone who had seen the news segment about the foundation. The letter expressed their admiration for Jasmine's work and their belief in her mission. Enclosed was a generous donation, a sum far greater than anything they had received so far. Jasmine sat back in her chair, stunned. The donation would provide them with the resources to expand their programs even further, to reach more people, and to offer even more support to those in need. It was a turning point, a moment when the foundation could truly scale. But with this newfound opportunity came an added responsibility. The stakes were higher now. The foundation was no longer just a local initiative. It was something bigger, something with the potential to impact entire regions. As Jasmine placed the letter on her desk, her heart raced with excitement. The future was unfolding before her, and she knew that this was only the beginning. There were challenges ahead, more problems to solve, more people to help, more obstacles to overcome. But she was no longer the same person who had first walked into Mr. Langston's living room all those months ago. She had grown, learned, and transformed. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Jasmine was ready. She had a purpose now. And no matter what came next, she was determined to rise above every challenge, every setback, and every doubt. A future unfolding. The months following the generous donation from the prominent donor were a whirlwind of activity. Jasmine's role at the Langston Foundation was rapidly evolving from a hands-on leader to a strategic visionary. The pressure to sustain the momentum, however, was starting to feel suffocating. The foundation was growing faster than she had ever anticipated. While Jasmine was thrilled by the impact they were making, she also felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The donation, while incredibly generous, was not without its complexities. It required a shift in how they managed resources, organized programs, and engaged with the community. Jasmine found herself in meetings with new board members, navigating complex budgets, and making decisions that would affect not just the foundation's future, but the lives of thousands of people. In one particularly intense meeting, as Jasmine sat at the head of the table, surrounded by financial advisors and senior staff, she felt a pang of doubt. They were discussing the allocation of the funds, how to divide the donation to maximize its impact. There were proposals to expand their housing programs, develop new outreach initiatives, and increase the educational resources they provided. It all seemed necessary, but each decision seemed like a step further away from the core mission of the foundation. Was the expansion going to help the people who needed it most, or was it going to turn the foundation into something unrecognizable? "Jasmine," Mr. Langston said, his voice breaking through her thoughts. "What do you think?" Jasmine paused, feeling the weight of the room on her. She had been listening to everyone's suggestions, but she hadn't yet formed a clear answer. Her mind kept drifting back to the original vision, the dream she had when she first walked into Mr. Langston's living room. It wasn't about becoming a massive organization. It was about real, tangible change in the lives of the people they served. "I think we need to remember why we're here," Jasmine said, her voice steadied despite the uncertainty inside. "It's not about becoming a bigger organization. It's about making a direct impact. I want us to expand, yes, but in a way that doesn't compromise the personal connections we've built with the people in this community. We need to scale thoughtfully. We need to maintain the human aspect of what we do." There was a brief silence as the room absorbed her words. Jasmine's heart was racing, unsure if her perspective would resonate with the team. But then Mr. Langston smiled at her, a knowing look in his eyes. "You're right," he said simply. "Let's focus on quality, not just quantity. We can grow without losing the heart of this foundation." Jasmine felt a sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't about managing an empire. It was about being true to the mission and making sure every decision was aligned with the values they had built the foundation on. With that direction in mind, they decided to focus on several key programs: expanding mentorship opportunities, enhancing food security initiatives, and providing microloans for families in need to start their own businesses. The foundation's mission was still rooted in the people they served. It wasn't about chasing endless growth. It was about empowering individuals and creating lasting change within the community. With this renewed clarity, Jasmine threw herself into the next phase of the foundation's growth, taking steps to ensure that they could scale in a way that felt authentic. In the meantime, Jasmine had begun to reflect more deeply on her personal life. As the foundation continued to grow, her time became increasingly stretched. She barely had time for herself, and her relationships were beginning to suffer. Her phone buzzed with messages from her childhood friends, people she had grown up with at the orphanage, but she couldn't find the time to respond. Even when she was home, her mind raced with ideas and plans for the foundation. One evening, while sitting on her couch, Jasmine stared at her phone for several minutes. She had been meaning to reach out to her old friend Maya, but between meetings and events, she had kept putting it off. Maya had always been a rock for her, a reminder of her roots and the simple joys in life. Jasmine knew she had to make more of an effort to stay connected with the people who had shaped her. Picking up the phone, she finally sent Maya a message. "Hey Maya, I've been so busy with the foundation, but I've missed you. Would love to catch up soon. Let me know when you're free." To Jasmine's relief, Maya replied almost immediately. "I've been waiting for this text. Let's grab dinner tomorrow night. No excuses." That evening, Jasmine realized just how much she had missed her friendship with Maya. As they sat across from each other in a small diner, sharing stories of their lives, Jasmine felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. Maya had always been someone who could ground her, who reminded her of the person she had been before the foundation had consumed so much of her life. "You're doing incredible things, Jasmine," Maya said, sipping her drink. "But don't forget to take care of yourself too. You can't pour from an empty cup." Jasmine smiled at her friend's wise words. It was something she had known, but had been too caught up in the whirlwind of the foundation to pay attention to. The conversation with Maya was a reminder to slow down, to breathe, and to remember that she couldn't help others if she didn't take care of herself first. As Jasmine navigated the growing demands of the foundation, she also began to carve out more time for herself. She learned to set boundaries, to delegate more tasks to her team, and to take moments to recharge. Her life began to feel more balanced, even as the foundation's impact continued to expand. One afternoon, as Jasmine sat in the office reviewing reports, her phone rang. It was a call from a government official, a regional senator who had heard about the work of the Langston Foundation and wanted to discuss possible partnerships. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She had always envisioned expanding their reach, but the idea of working with government officials was both exciting and intimidating. She hadn't expected this kind of attention so soon. After a brief conversation, the senator expressed interest in collaborating on a large-scale initiative to address food insecurity in the region, potentially providing funding and support for the foundation's programs. This could be a game changer, an opportunity to take the foundation to new heights, but it also meant that the foundation's operations would have to scale up even further. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, negotiations, and planning. Jasmine and her team worked tirelessly to prepare for the partnership. It was a daunting prospect, but Jasmine felt ready. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the opportunity to make an even greater impact. At the same time, the partnership brought with it new challenges. There were bureaucratic hurdles, additional oversight, and pressure to deliver results. Jasmine had to navigate a delicate balance between maintaining the foundation's independence and aligning with the government's expectations. It was no longer just about the community. It was about navigating the complex world of politics, funding, and large-scale change. One afternoon, while Jasmine was deep in thought at her desk, Mr. Langston stopped by her office, his warm presence filling the room. "How's everything going, Jasmine? You've been a bit quieter than usual." Jasmine leaned back in her chair, her mind racing with the complexity of everything happening. "It's a lot, Mr. Langston. The partnership could be huge, but I'm worried that we'll lose the heart of what we're doing. We can't let the politics and bureaucracy get in the way of our mission." Mr. Langston smiled knowingly. "Jasmine, you've built something incredible. This partnership is just a new chapter, not the end of your story. Stay true to what's in your heart. You'll always have my support." Those words gave Jasmine the strength she needed to move forward. She was ready for the challenges ahead, knowing that no matter how big the foundation grew, it would always be driven by the same core values: compassion, community, and change. With renewed determination, Jasmine took the next step in her journey. The future was unfolding before her, and she was ready to lead the Langston Foundation to new heights. But no matter how far she went, she knew one thing for certain. She would always be the same person who had helped that blind old man in the grocery store all those months ago, driven by a deep desire to make the world a better place, one person at a time. In the final part of this journey, Jasmine faces the ultimate test of leadership. With the partnership in full swing, she must confront unforeseen challenges that threaten to derail everything she has worked for. Will she be able to preserve the integrity of the foundation? Or will the pressures of success pull it apart? The final chapter is a powerful conclusion to Jasmine's journey of growth, resilience, and the pursuit of a dream that started with one simple act of kindness.